Okay, this is my first podcast, hopefully not my last. Basically, I understand that a lot of people who maybe follow my blog don't like to read lots of text. And also, sometimes it's not possible to get the full message across by writing. I like to think that I can put emotion into my writing, but maybe it doesn't come across in the way that I mean it to. So I do know that some people like to listen to podcasts. They like to be able to stop and pause and come back to it and when they've got time. So I decided that for the post that I did recently about why I do what I do, I decided that I would record that as a blog. And I think in the future, certain blog posts I will turn into podcasts. I don't think of it as a podcast in the normal sense because no one's mad enough to sit here and chat to me about things. But I think for this one in particular, it will help to portray the message that I'm trying to get across. So the first thing I should do is, as I did with the post, is I should mention trigger warnings, because I get triggered like the best of them, and I would be remiss not to give a warning for the content that I may talk about. So I will discuss CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material and abuse. I will also reference my CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and some people may find that disturbing, and to be fair, you should find topics like that disturbing, but I will try not to go into too much graphic detail because there's no requirement for me to do so, but I will be touching on those points. So I was recently chatting to someone via the blog, and they got onto the subject of why I do what I do, and it made me realise that I've never actually properly laid it out in one thread, in one sort of go. It's always been little bits here and there across different blog posts and YouTube videos from my channel. So I thought that, I'll do that. I'll put it all into one succinct blog post or podcast and let people know just why this is so important to me. I have never wished what has happened to me over the years on even my worst enemy. It's not just the effect it's had on me, but also it's the effect it's had on those I love and love me, and those closest to me over the years. And I, in the beginning, wouldn't even talk to the therapist about the graphic detail of what I witnessed because I didn't want to damage them or feel like I was perpetuating an abuse or the abuses that I'd witnessed over the years. But I sometimes honestly do think that every parent should experience 5 minutes of viewing the world through these two eyes that I have in my head, because then they would fully understand all of the dangers that are faced by their children whilst they're sitting quietly in the corner looking at their phone screens, their tablets or their gaming monitors with their headphones on. But again, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, so I try to walk a fine line when I'm writing my content and when I'm talking to people about it, because I don't want to trigger you. And I am truly sorry if during this podcast I do trigger anyone, but hopefully it'll help you to connect with me and to understand why I continue to do what I do and why sometimes it seems like a really uphill battle. I still do it. So sorry, not sorry. This is going to be a long one, but if you reach the end, then it shows that you actually do care about protecting your children. So who is this crazy man, and why is he here in your ears? I started life back in Northern Ireland, where I was born 46 years ago, on the 1st of April this month, as it happens. And in that hazy past, I had a very normal, happy childhood, as normal as it gets for a geek like me anyway. I managed to mix time in front of computers with dismantling all my toys to see how they worked, which my parents weren't too happy about because I was really rubbish about putting them together again. I like to read and do normal things, played sports, got up to no good until the street lights came on, which was always the indicator back as a kid that it's time to go home. But if I'm honest, I always really wanted to be a real policeman. But I was told when I left school and was ready for the real world, I was told that I was too young for that. So next best thing for me was when I was 18, I joined the Royal Air Force Police. I was way back in the day in 1997. As a young, naive 18-year-old, I started my journey into adulthood, and I actually enjoyed much of my career, and it was a 22-year-long career, full career in the Royal Air Force. I saw lots of parts of the world, some nice, some not so nice. Kuwait, Iraq, the Falkland Islands, Northern Ireland again, and I was also in Germany with NATO. So the experiences that I had along the way, some of my most cherished memories, and there's a few friendships there that I made that have lasted the test of time and continue to this day. But the last 8 years of my career, which was a double-edged sword, it was where I believed I belonged, and I'd spent my entire career aiming towards was to be in the incident response, network defense, computer geeky area of the job, and it was a rare opportunity because there were only 3 of us from the RAF Police who were doing that job, and I felt like my luck had really turned, and I'd landed on my feet in a job that I was going to really excel at and enjoy. So I was basically now an incident responder in helping to protect the MOD network from all threats of all skill levels, including the users. But basically, what I was told was if the Russians or the Chinese attacked the network, or there was malware, viruses on the network, we would go and investigate it, find out how it happened, find out if we'd lost any data, and secure it. So that was sort of what I was expecting. But when I actually started the job, we found out that part of the role was to investigate criminal and inappropriate web browsing. And people were always shocked to think that there were even people who were silly enough to browse on a work network to porn, but you would be surprised just how stupid some people are. They clearly thought that it's the internet, no one's going to see what I'm up to, but unfortunately lots of people did. And over the course of the 6 years, I often asked about counselling and therapy and stuff, and all the stuff that you would expect to be in place for people who had to look at some pretty horrendous materials, and there were no resources. So I think I learned very quickly how to wear a mask, and I still now appear as that happy, cheeky chappy that didn't want to lose his job for being weak. So the thing about that is that the version of me back then, before I started that job, was literally wanted to be the centre of attention, helping morale and keeping people laughing and being the joker. But that version of me died when I shortly after starting that job, and I grieved the loss of that version of me. Many people around me couldn't, and I have lost lots of friends and family over the years because they don't understand that I can't keep that mask on permanently. Colleen's the only person who really sees the real me without the mask, and thankfully she's still with me and hasn't left my side, and I'm here today because of that. But it is a mask, and it was an environment where you didn't want to talk about mental health, and in the military it was very much still highly stigmatized. So that was at the 6-year point of that job. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and obviously since then it's been diagnosed as CPTSD. So the next sort of piece I'm going to talk about is extremely difficult for me, and it's difficult for me to talk about, so I'm sure it'll be difficult to listen to. But if you want to skip ahead, then please do so. But it's an important part for me to talk about. With the diagnosis came a sense of almost relief that it had been identified why I was the way I was, why I was doing the things I was doing and saying the things I was saying. And from that moment, though, I was trapped at home, not just in my home, but trapped in my own head. And as I mentioned earlier, it didn't just affect me, it affected my wife. She had to live with me. And also, it pushed away many of the friends and family I had. But I estimate I viewed, and this is an estimate, I think I viewed more than 1 million inappropriate images, and at least a quarter of those were probably criminal across all the different levels of the scale that we used to use for assessing those images. And I was a typical man, and the bravado effect, which is a real thing. It's mentioned in the ACPO guidelines, which is why there's supposed to be mandatory counselling and duty of care in place, because not just men, but people in the military, people in general, will put on a bravado effect in that they don't want people to see that they're weak. So that added to the prolonging of what I was going through. But those images, the different images that I had to view, they floated around in my head. I didn't know what to do with them. But the brain being the brain, and if you can imagine that the brain is something that literally controls everything you do. It controls, your breathing, the fact that you breathe automatically. Imagine what happens when that organ turns against you, becomes your enemy. And in this case, it would turn those images into videos. It would morph the victims into my nephews and nieces, or children of people I knew. And then you can't imagine the torture that causes. And that's why when I say I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, that you might start to realise how extreme that is. I also have something as an offshoot of my mental illness. I now have somnophobia, and that's a genuine fear of sleep. Because when I'm asleep, I lose control of my ability to not, or to distract myself from these thoughts and to not think about these things. So I don't generally sleep anymore. I nap when my body needs it, and if I get to the point of my body needing more sleep, I have to medicate with sleeping tablets, because that's the only way I can get 3 or 4 hours without the brain kicking in its own little cinema of extreme content. But yeah, my wife is an angel. She's a saint, and she's dealt with me thrashing, screaming and crying out at night, my drastic mood swings, flash to bang of zero, and my self-imposed isolation. And she's stuck with me, the rock that she is, and always has been. But the day that I had one of my many road rage incidents, and she turned to me and she said, "I don't feel safe in the car with you," and that was like getting stabbed through the chest, And next day was the day I went and sought the referral through the GP to the Department of Mental Health in the MOD, and that's when the 2 years of really intensive therapy and medication started. They've carried on over the years, but the therapy, although it's not improved my mind in any substantial way, I still have a huge mistrust of humans. I still feel safest at home, where I can control my environment. The medication stabilised me though, and it helps me to leave the house when I need to. It's also prevented any, fits of anger or road rage, mainly because Colleen does most of the driving now. She does most of the day-to-day things for me, because I spend my time just trying to focus on things that will distract me. Over 10 years later, I still rely on therapy and medication, and that's likely going to be there for the rest of my life. As I mentioned before, I lost family. I've lost many of the people I call friends, because they couldn't understand who I'd become, and they didn't realise that the old Dale had died, and this was now just a mask. Colleen sees it all. She's still with me. She's still by my side, and that's how I know that she'll always be by my side, and I never take that for granted. But there's a few friends that I've managed to keep in my life. Luckily for them, they're still my friends, because they barely see me and have to put up with me. But I'm thankful that I know that they're always there if I need them, or if Colleen ever needs them. The other thing that we added to our life at the time when I was diagnosed was Leffy, which, if you follow my blog at all, you will have seen many pictures of him. And until that point, I'd never understood, when people came into work or whatever, and they were like, oh, our dog died, and they'd be in bits, and they'd be crying and what have you, and you think, well, it's just a dog, what are you on about? Because I never had pets growing up, never a pet person at all. And then Colleen did all, I'd said to her one day, I've always thought maybe about a dog, and I've always loved French bulldogs, and I think they're cool, and they're brilliant, and we should think about getting one. And she was as surprised as anyone when I'd said all this. And then that started her. She did all the research into it. She went and visited the owners, the dog breeders, and visited the dog when the dog was born, and then she went to pick him up and bring him home. And in the instant that she brought him home, I understood. In that moment, I understood why people felt the way they did about their pets, because it was like almost a moment of realization. And I've since, I call my wife my rock, and she can't be with me all the time because she works, and she has a life that I wanted to have to give a respite from me. But he's someone that I call my pebble, because when my rock's not here, my pebble's there to get me through the rough moments. And he will often sense when I'm triggered or if I'm spiraling, and he'll come over and he'll just put a paw on me, or just lie beside me, and that's in that moment enough to ground me. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that my rock and my pebble are lifesavers in so many ways. So that's me, the crazy guy. The world through my eyes, and I reiterate the trigger warning from before, that I'm going to be discussing CSAM and abuse and CPTSD, not in any graphic detail, but there will be references. What would 5 minutes through my eyes look like to a parent? So let's consider that over the 6 years that I was actively doing the job, and it was a job that broke me, I would basically go in daily and sit in front of a bank of large monitors, and I'd take the next job from the top of the stack. And we used to say that if you were really unlucky, 1 in 3 of the jobs you did would be criminal, with the other 2 being inappropriate web browsing, or normal porn as we called it. And I was just that lucky that normally I would pick up 3 in a row of criminal jobs, and that just seemed to be the way it always panned out. So I was I was more often than not looking at criminal material, and in layman's terms, we would basically, each job we would extract the data from the packets that had been captured for a user's web browsing session. And packets are basically, they're an envelope in terms that you might want to think of. They're an envelope that contains everything that makes up the web page that a user wanted to view as part of their session. So when they browse the internet, so when you go to a web page, think of all that data that's on there in an envelope that I can open, and I can see that you were at that web page and when you were there and what you clicked on that page. And until the point of actually extracting all the images out and the web addresses, we never actually knew if we were dealing with an inappropriate or a criminal case. And some people think that you can harden yourself to these things. I was never able to do that, and I would empathise far too much with each one. And every time I saw an image that made me realise that I was dealing with a criminal case, every time it was like a punch to the stomach. And criminal pornography ranges across many different genres. You've got bestiality, fantasy, rape, necrophilia, and ultimately the one that everyone even cringes at hearing the words, child porn, or child sexual abuse material as it's called now. Just saying that to someone in a conversation, you see them recoil. So the words themselves cause people to recoil and to think bad things. So that's without even having to look at it. I didn't realise how naive I was before starting the role, and the levels of depravity that exist on the internet. And my mantra used to be that if you can imagine it, it's on the internet. If you can't imagine it, it's still on the internet, you just haven't found it yet. And I did observe some truly horrific imagery. Some of the more disgusting involved, animals, rape and torture, but none of them affected me as much as imagery that had children. Because, they're the most vulnerable in our society, and they're the ones that we as adults are supposed to be protecting and not using as a tool for sexual gratification purposes. So I viewed these images because my role was to grade them for the legal process that would follow. Because I was a policeman, I'd try and take in every detail, hoping to be able to identify a perpetrator or maybe a location, which you never would, but that's how fully invested in each image you would become. If I'd been prepared for the role or given the right coping mechanisms and tools for my toolbox, then I might not have damaged myself so much, and might have been able to disassociate myself from what I was seeing and process in a different way. But alas, many of my night terrors are so realistic, and as I've looked into these images, I've looked into the eyes of the victims, and it causes me a huge deal of emotional pain. Because if you can imagine waking in the night with an instant feeling of disgust or shame, nausea, and at the feeling that you've not done enough to prevent the abuse, and that's not normally something that I would pose or describe, but in this moment, I want you as parents to take a moment to really think about that and contemplate what it means and how that has impacted me as a human being. And that's just from having to view the evidence of the actual abuses. And when I've said in many of my blog posts that I don't want your child to become evidence in a case or just another stat, this is what I'm referring to. There's brave people out there that at this very moment that are still doing the job that I used to do, because there are still evil bastards out there who want to use your child for their own and others' sexual gratification. That's the reality of the world we live in today, and technology has only made it easier for sexual predators to target their victims, allowing them months, years sometimes, to groom a child, rather than when I was growing up, they they had to physically go out in a van, go out in a car, tempt the child into a car, each time risking being caught or seen or observed, and it was a high risk event for them to try and do that, of them trying to abduct a child. Not so anymore. You still have that, obviously, as a risk out there. You still have stranger danger, but now you have this much more difficult environment to police, where they will take their time to gain the trust of a child. And you might start now to realise what 5 minutes of viewing the world through my eyes looks like. But you as parents, and I can't emphasise this enough, you must understand the dangers that are lurking online, because the online world has, I'm a big proponent for the online world and technology and the internet for kids who are growing up, because there's so many positive aspects to it and so much good information and stuff on there that helps a child develop and become ready for the world that they'll have to live in and work in and develop in. And it keeps them relevant with their peers as they grow up. But my point is, and always has been and always will be, that parents need to be aware of all the risks. They need to know how to teach their children about the risks. And unfortunately, you can't rely on schools these days to be doing that for you, because, as you'll have seen in other posts that I've written, it's a postcode lottery with regards to the level of awareness that they're being taught at school. And when I was growing up, as I say, stranger danger was something that everyone could talk about. Parents, teachers, guardians, everyone understood it and knew how to talk about not talking to strangers, not accepting sweets or getting into vehicles. And that's because they understood how to talk about it and how to understand it. But as they've moved into this online world, where they can take time to build trust and protect themselves from casual witnesses, sexual predators know that parents aren't as well equipped these days to teach their kids about those risks. So predators can now take that much longer to build that relationship, so they can become Johnny age 15. And the first time a parent knows that something is wrong is when their own child isn't there in the morning because they've gone to meet Johnny age 15 and then not seen again. It's impossible to truly know who you are talking to on the internet. And the same is said for children. Even more so these days, with advancements in deepfake technology that can be used to make visual representations of someone who sounds just like someone else. And I've seen it numerous times, when a parent will chuck a phone or a tablet at a child, in the same way that when I was a kid, they would chuck a dummy in my mouth to shut me up. These days, it's technology that they use to quieten children down. And I'm not overstating the fact that these days children are far more technically literate than most parents. And if they want to hide activity from you, it's probably going to be trivial for them to do so, because most parents won't understand technology or won't understand social media or the different apps that kids are using. But they'll say that they're a friend with their child on social media, and they can see who their children are friends with. And to be honest, at least if a parent says that to me, it shows that they have a level of actually giving a shit, about what their kid's doing, and it's more than I've witnessed with some. But most of those parents are probably completely unaware of what I've discovered and written about before, what are called spam accounts. And they are separate social media accounts that children have, where they've invited all their friends to, that they do activity or they talk about things that they don't want mum and dad to see. And I've never said that a parent needs to be a geek like me, because even I don't understand some of the things that kids are up to these days, and that's from someone who works in a technical role doing technical things. But my message, if there's one thing you take away from any of this, is stay interested in what they're doing, have open and honest communications with them, and talk to them about the risks that you do know about, and do it in the same way that you would with stranger danger chat. You might not fully understand the online world, but don't let that make you put your head in the sand. If you need reminders why, just replay the last couple of the last couple of sections that I've spoken to you about. The internet, the internet. It's a double-edged sword. Like I say, lots of positives, but it has plenty of dark corners. And the internet that you know and probably love is vastly different from the dark areas of the internet that is home to some of the lowest of the low and most depraved in our society today. The dark web, as you've probably heard it referred to, that's where they live and operate from. And it's also where they congregate in communities. They have communities of their own where they share material that they've gathered. They also give each other tips and tricks with how to do what they do. This used to be stuff that would happen in prisons. They would basically learn from each other in prison about how to be better at what they do. And now they can do it on the dark web, and it enables them to teach others how to destroy the lives of vulnerable and innocent children. Just two of my recent blog posts on the blog, if you want to have a look, I do suggest you have a read. One was Unmasking 764, and the other one was about the TV program Adolescence on Netflix. And both of those go into a bit more detail on some of these communities that exist online, and your children could be getting exposed to these sort of viewpoints and these ideologies, and if they are, you really want to try and steer them away from that. But these communities, they're also full of and I use the term people very, very loosely. I have very different words for talking about them, but I won't mention them in polite company. They egg each other on to basically carry out even more depraved acts. And each time it's like a competition among them to get someone to do something even worse. Because believe me when I say your child is nothing to them. They're not human. They're an insignificant toy. And these are the people that you have to protect your children from becoming a victim. And this is the main reason why I continue to do what I do to try and help you to do that. And if I can even help protect one kid, then I would say I'll sleep easier at night, but I won't. But you know what I mean. Just educate them, talk to them, let them know that if something doesn't feel right, they can come to you, they can raise it as a concern without fear of judgment. Otherwise, you risk losing them to this world and the life sentence that follows for them after being abused. And I know most of you as parents will understand and not wish that for their child. So there's a few stats that I mentioned on my blog post on this, and in 2023 the US National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received over 32 million reports related to online child sexual exploitation, including CSAM. The Internet Watch Foundation reported in 2021 that 62% of CSAM involved children aged 11 to 15 years of age, and a notable increase in self-generated content among teenagers. So these are just a couple of stats that show the magnitude of the issue. And it's not something that's abating, it's not something that's going to go away. Technology is advancing at light speed, and this is only going to create more opportunities for those who lurk in those dark corners of the internet. As mentioned, you can't rely on schools to be educating your child properly, because I've written a couple of articles on this. I've tried a couple of times now to get online safety added to the national curriculum, and they've failed on both occasions. I thought the recent one, I thought, new government, I'll try and maybe they'll understand. But as is typical with MPs and politicians, they focus on the things they think are in place that actually aren't. And I think it's important to note that it's a postcode lottery. If your child's at a school where there's a decent IT or a decent teacher of the computers and technology, then they might get taught the right things. But it's all statutory guidance is a term that they like to use in the world of politics. So they've given guidance for what schools need to be teaching. My point has always been that the curriculum should be created by people who know what they're talking about, who work in that industry and can put the correct content together, which then can be delivered by anyone. Whereas the government, the way they do it now, it's dependent on each school to create that curriculum for the students to cover off on certain points. But if you're not creating the content to the best of the ability, then that means children will only learn what they're being taught. And it is very different across schools. I know people who work in the school environments across the country and tell me that it is a lottery when it comes to what children are being taught. So it does become your responsibility to protect your child online. But, fear not. I've explained why I continue to do what I do, and that's not going to change. I have my mental health issues, and there are times when I feel, extremely dejected because this isn't a topic that goes viral. It's not a sexy topic that goes viral. Like what someone had for dinner today, or what the latest trend is in the fashion world, or I'm not at the level of these influencers who talk about those really, really important topics. And unfortunately, that means that the algorithm doesn't pick up my content and doesn't shine a light on it. But it's not going to stop me putting it out there, because, as I said before, I think that it's important that that information is out there if people want to go looking for it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's why I will remain passionate about it. I will champion it. I will keep annoying politicians to see if we can get something changed on that front. But yeah, have a look at the blog. Do share it. I'm a hater of social media. I left all social media about 5 years ago, but if I want to try and get this blog anywhere, I know that I'm going to have some interaction with it. So I have recently dipped my toe in the water, and I'm on Blue Sky. So if you're on Blue Sky, if you have a look for Cyber Safety Guy, you'll find me. But if you have comments, if you have questions, reach out to me. I'm always more than happy to take time to chat to someone about how to protect their kid. If there's something you don't understand, or if there's something you'd like covered as a blog post in the future, let me know. But thank you for reaching the end, because I know it means that you give a shit about protecting your kid, and I am here to help you do that. I will now stop talking because your ears are probably bleeding. But thanks very much, and hopefully see you on the next one.